Her fiancé left her waiting at the station. Then a lonely cowboy took her home. The whole town saw the young woman sitting alone on that trunk, but only one man stopped long enough to ask why her eyes looked like she had just lost her future. It was late afternoon in Cedar Ridge, Wyoming, in the fall of 1887. The train had already pulled away, leaving behind a fading trail of smoke, a few tired passengers, and a thin layer of dust that drifted over the wooden platform. Horses moved along the street beyond the station. Wagon wheels creaked. Men carried sacks of flour and feed. A woman in a brown bonnet hurried two children toward the mercantile. But Clara Whitmore did not move. She sat on her old leather trunk with both gloved hands folded over a bundle of letters tied with a pale blue ribbon. Her traveling dress had once been clean cream, but 3 days on the train had left dust along the hem and wrinkles at her sleeves. Her auburn hair was pinned neatly beneath a small hat, though a few loose strands had slipped free around her tired face. She had come from St. Louis with one trunk, one carpetbag, and one promise. That promise had a name: Nathan Bell. For 6 months, Nathan had written to her like a man building a home with words. He had told her about his ranch outside Cedar Ridge, about the cottonwood trees near the creek, about the little white house with a porch facing the morning sun. He had said he was tired of eating alone. He had said the West was no place for a man with no woman to share it. He had said he wanted a wife with a steady heart, not just pretty hands. Clara had believed him. She had read those letters by lamplight in her aunt's boarding room back in St. Louis. She had read them after long days sewing collars and mending cuffs for women who looked through her like she was part of the furniture. She had pressed the pages flat when they curled at the corners. She had smiled at the lines where Nathan wrote that he was not rich, but he was honest. Honest. That word now felt heavy in her lap. He was supposed to meet her when the train came in. He had written it clearly in his last letter. I will be standing near the station door in my dark brown coat. You will not have to search for me long. But she had searched. She had searched every man who stepped forward when the train stopped. She had searched the gray-haired ranchers, the young cowhands, the shopkeeper with the black apron, the man loading crates near the freight door. She had watched husbands greet wives, fathers lift children, brothers slap each other on the shoulder. No dark brown coat. No Nathan Bell. At first she told herself he was late. A wagon wheel could break. A horse could throw a shoe. A ranch problem could hold a man back. The West was wide and rough. She would not judge him too quickly. So she waited. The station master asked once if she needed help. She said no with a polite smile. A boy sweeping the platform looked at her twice, then went inside. The sun dropped lower. The gold light turned thin and red across the dusty street. One by one, people left. Still Clara waited. When the church bell rang 6 times from the far end of town, something inside her finally understood what her pride had been refusing to hear. No one was coming. She lowered her eyes to the letters. Her fingers tightened around the ribbon. She did not cry, not there, not where strangers could watch her break like a dropped cup. She only sat straighter. That was when Caleb Rourke saw her. Caleb had come into Cedar Ridge for nails, coffee, and a new harness strap. He was 35, broad-shouldered, sun-browned, and quiet in the way of a man who had spent too many years listening to wind across empty land. His ranch lay 9 miles east of town, a hard piece of ground called Willow Creek, though the creek had run low for 2 summers straight. He was tying the harness strap to his saddle when he noticed her. At first he only glanced. A woman alone at a station was not always trouble. Sometimes someone was coming. Sometimes a room had been arranged. Sometimes a brother or cousin was only delayed at the livery. But Caleb had lived long enough to know the difference between waiting and being left. This woman was being left. He saw it in the way she kept looking down the street even after there was no reason to look. He saw it in the way she held those letters like they were the last board under her feet. He saw it in the way her mouth stayed calm while her eyes carried fear. Caleb put one boot in the stirrup. Then he stopped. It was not his affair. That was the easy thought. He had cattle to check before dark. He had a hired boy who forgot half the chores unless reminded. He had a fence line down near the north draw. A strange woman with a trunk and a broken promise did not belong to him. He got one hand on the saddle horn. Then he looked back again. The platform was almost empty now. The station door had closed. The wind lifted the edge of the blue ribbon in her hands, and Clara pressed it down quickly, as if even that small movement might take something from her. Caleb let out a slow breath. He took his boot out of the stirrup and walked toward her. His spurs sounded softly against the boards. Clara heard him before she looked up. When she did, her face changed only a little, but he noticed. She was measuring him, deciding whether one more man in this town was about to disappoint her. Caleb removed his hat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and careful, "do you have somewhere to go tonight?" Clara stared at him for a moment. The question was simple, kind even. And somehow it hurt worse than if he had asked why she was alone. She looked past him toward the empty street, then down at the letters in her lap. "I was supposed to," she said. Caleb's jaw tightened, not in anger at her, but at whoever had put that answer in her mouth. "What's his name?" he asked. She hesitated. A woman alone in a strange town had to be careful with every word. "Nathan Bell," she said at last. The name changed Caleb's face. Not much, he was too guarded for that, but something in his eyes cooled. Clara noticed. "You know him?" she asked. Caleb looked toward the road beyond the station, where the evening shadows were stretching long. "I know of him," he said. That was not the same as yes. And it was far worse than no. Clara stood slowly, one hand still around the letters, the other gripping the handle of her carpetbag. She lifted her chin the way a woman does when pride is the only coat she has left. "Then perhaps you can tell me where to find him." Caleb did not answer quickly. That silence told her more than any sentence could have. A horse shifted by the rail behind him. Somewhere near the saloon, a man laughed too loudly. The wind pushed dust across Clara's boots. Caleb looked at her trunk, then at her tired face. "There's a boarding house on Ash Street," he said. "Mrs. Dempsey runs it, clean rooms, fair price. I can carry your trunk there." "I can pay my way," Clara said at once. "I didn't say you couldn't." His answer was plain, without insult, and that made her pause. For the first time since stepping off the train, she looked at him properly. His hat was worn at the brim. His coat was clean but faded. His hands were rough, with a small scar across one knuckle. He did not smile to soften the moment. He did not pity her out loud. He simply waited. "What is your name?" she asked. "Caleb Rourke." "I'm Clara Whitmore." He nodded once, as if he would remember it carefully. Then he bent, lifted her trunk like it weighed less than her shame, and started toward the street. Clara followed him, with the letters held close to her chest. She did not know yet that Nathan Bell had not only abandoned her. She did not know that the man she had traveled across the country to marry was hiding a truth that could ruin more than one life. And she certainly did not know that the quiet cowboy walking ahead of her with her trunk in his hands would soon have to choose between protecting his own lonely heart and bringing her into the only home he had left. By the time Clara reached the boarding house, her arms ached from holding herself together. Mrs. Dempsey's place stood at the corner of Ash Street and Mill Road, a two-story wooden house with yellow curtains, a hanging porch lamp, and a row of boots lined beside the door. It smelled of coffee, coal smoke, and boiled potatoes. To Clara, after the dust and shame of the station, it felt almost too warm. Mrs. Dempsey opened the door before Caleb could knock twice. She was a stout woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a flour-dusted apron. Her gaze went first to Caleb, then to Clara, then to the trunk in Caleb's hands. In that one look, she seemed to understand half the story and guess the other half. "Well," Mrs. Dempsey said, "bring it in before the whole street learns my business." Caleb stepped inside and set the trunk near the stairs. Clara followed with her carpet bag pressed against her side. She kept her chin steady, though every board creak in the quiet hallway made her feel like a stranger being judged by the walls. "This is Miss Clara Whitmore," Caleb said. "She needs a room." Mrs. Dempsey looked at Clara again, not unkindly. "How long?" Clara opened her mouth, then closed it. She did not know. That was the worst part, not knowing if she needed a bed for one night, 1 week, or until her courage ran out and she boarded the first eastbound train with nothing but humiliation in her trunk. 1 week, Caleb said. Clara turned toward him. "Mr. Rourke, I did not ask you to arrange that." "No," he said, "you didn't." Mrs. Dempsey watched them both with great interest. Clara reached for the small coin purse in her coat pocket. Caleb was faster. He placed money on the little desk near the stairs. "For the first week," he said, "meals included." Clara's face warmed. "I said I can pay my way." "And I believed you." "Then why did you do that?" Caleb picked up his hat from the desk, turning it once in his hands. His voice stayed quiet. "Because tonight is not the night you should have to prove it." The words struck her, in a place she had been trying hard to protect. Mrs. Dempsey looked down at the coins and cleared her throat. "Room 3, she said. "Clean sheets. Supper in 20 minutes. No arguing in my front hall unless you intend to pay extra for entertainment." Clara wanted to object again, but she was too tired, too shaken, too aware that kindness, when offered simply, could make a person feel weaker than cruelty. Caleb lifted her trunk once more and carried it upstairs. He placed it at the foot of a narrow bed in a small room with a washstand, a quilt, and one window facing the backyard. Clara stood near the doorway, still gripping the letters. He did not step farther inside than needed. "There's a lock," he said, nodding toward the door. "Window latch works too." She noticed that he had checked. "A small thing. A decent thing." "Thank you," she said. He gave a short nod. At the door he paused, as if there was more he should say but no clean way to say it. "If Nathan Bell comes," Clara said before he could leave, "tell him where I am." Caleb looked at her. For a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. "I will," he said. But he did not say Nathan would come. After Caleb left, Clara shut the door and turned the key. Only then did her shoulders drop. She sat on the edge of the bed with the letters in her lap. The pale blue ribbon looked soft and foolish now. She pulled one letter free and opened it. "My dear Clara, by the time you read this, I will be counting the days until you arrive. I have never been a man for fancy words, but I know this much. A house is only wood until someone makes it warm." She stared at the handwriting until the ink blurred. Then she folded the letter carefully and placed it back under the ribbon. She still did not cry. Crying felt too final. Downstairs, supper plates clinked. A man laughed softly. A chair scraped the floor. Life continued in the rooms below as if Clara's whole future had not just fallen through the boards of a train platform. She washed her face. She pinned her loose hair again. She went down to supper with her pride dressed as neatly as she could manage. Mrs. Dempsey gave her stew, bread, and coffee without asking questions. That kindness felt almost suspicious until Clara realized the woman was simply waiting. Boarding house women knew how to wait. They collected stories the way others collected buttons. At the long table sat a traveling salesman, an elderly widow named Mrs. Pike, and a young telegraph clerk with ink on his cuffs. They all glanced at Clara, but no one spoke of the station. For that she was grateful. She ate slowly, though she could barely taste the food. Later that night, after the lamps were turned low, Clara lay awake under the quilt and listened to Cedar Ridge outside her window. A horse moved in the alley. Wind pushed against the loose shutter. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, then stopped. She thought of St. Louis, her aunt's narrow room, the sewing basket near the window, the life she had left because Nathan Bell had written about honesty, land, and a home waiting for her. Then she thought of Caleb Rourke. Not because she wanted to. Because he had been the only person who had seen her sitting there and treated her as if she was not a scandal, not a mistake, not a foolish woman with a bundle of letters. Just someone who needed somewhere safe for the night. By morning, Cedar Ridge had already begun talking. Clara knew it the moment she stepped into the street. Two women outside the mercantile paused their conversation. A man sweeping in front of the barber shop looked at her and looked away too quickly. Dottie, the young girl who helped at the cafe, nearly dropped a stack of plates when Clara walked in. Clara kept her back straight. She ordered coffee and toast. She paid with her own coins. She chose a table near the window where she could see the street. If Nathan came, she would not hide. She had waited like a bride yesterday. Today she would wait like a woman, owed an explanation. The cafe door opened. Caleb Rourke stepped inside. He looked as if he had slept little. Dust marked the lower edge of his coat, and his hair was damp from washing at a pump. His eyes found Clara at once, but he did not rush toward her or act as if he owned her trouble. He removed his hat and walked over. "Morning," he said. "Good morning. How did you sleep?" "Enough," she said. He accepted the lie without forcing her to defend it. Dottie brought him coffee before he asked. That told Clara he was known here, respected too, perhaps. People gave respected men coffee without making them wait. Caleb sat across from her, only after she gave the smallest nod. "I asked at the livery," he said. "Nathan Bell's horse has not been there in more than a week." Clara's fingers tightened around her cup. "I asked at the mercantile too," he continued. "He bought supplies 12 days ago, flour, salt, lamp oil, cartridges." She looked up at the last word. Caleb saw the concern in her face. "Common enough out here," he said, "doesn't mean trouble." "But you think there is trouble." "I think there are questions." Clara swallowed. "Does he live far?" 7 miles north of town." "Then I want to go there." Caleb's expression changed. "Miss Whitmore." "I came here to marry him," she said, keeping her voice low so the cafe would not hear. "If he has changed his mind, he can say it to my face. If something happened to him, I need to know. I will not sit in that boarding house while strangers decide my story for me." For the first time, something like admiration moved across Caleb's face. Not soft, not romantic. Respect. "That road is rough," he said. "I have survived 3 days on a train beside a woman who talked without breathing. I can survive a rough road." One corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. "That's so." "Yes." He looked out the window toward the northern road. Then he looked back at Clara. "All right," he said, "I'll take you after breakfast." She had expected another argument. The absence of one startled her. "You will. You're going whether I help or not." "That is true. And I'd rather you didn't go alone." Clara looked down at her coffee. Something in her chest loosened just a little. Outside, a wagon rattled past. The morning sun struck the cafe window and lit the blue ribbon around her bundle of letters, which sat beside her plate like evidence in a trial no one had agreed to hold. Caleb noticed the letters. "Do you still believe them?" he asked quietly. Clara did not answer at once. She touched the ribbon with one finger. "I believe I need to know who wrote them." Caleb nodded. After breakfast, they rode north in his wagon. Cedar Ridge fell behind them quickly. The town's noise faded into wind, wheels, and the steady pull of Caleb's team. Clara sat beside him with her gloved hands folded tight, her trunk left safely at the boarding house, and the letters tucked inside her coat. The land opened around them, wide in brown gold under a pale sky. Fence posts leaned in uneven lines. Dry grass bent in the wind. Far off, cattle moved like dark marks on the hills. Caleb did not fill the silence. Clara was grateful. After nearly an hour, a small ranch came into view, a low house, a barn, a corral gate hanging crooked, no smoke from the chimney, no horse tied out front, no sound but wind. Clara sat straighter. "That's it?" she asked. Caleb slowed the team. "That's Belle's place." The wagon stopped by the gate. Clara climbed down before Caleb could offer his hand. Her boots touched the hard dirt. She looked at the house, at the closed shutters, at the empty porch. Something about the stillness made her skin go cold. Caleb walked ahead and knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again. Only the wind replied. Clara stepped onto the porch. She saw dust gathered against the threshold, not days of dust, more than that. Caleb tested the door. Locked. From inside the house came no movement, no voice, no sign of a man delayed by accident or illness. Clara turned slowly and saw something nailed to the porch post. A torn strip of paper, folded once, held by a rusted tack. Her name was written on it. Miss Clara Whitmore. Her breath caught. Caleb reached for it, then stopped and looked at her. "It's yours," he said. Clara pulled it free with trembling fingers. The paper shook as she opened it. There were only 2 lines. "Forgive me, do not look for me. Nathan." The world seemed to narrow around those words. The house, the porch, the wind, the man beside her, all of it faded until only that little note remained. "Forgive me. Do not look for me." Clara stared at it until her hand stopped shaking. Then she folded it once, very neatly, and placed it inside her coat with the letters. Caleb said nothing. That silence was the kindest thing he could have given her. At last, Clara looked at the empty house and spoke in a voice that was calm enough to frighten even herself. "He knew I was coming." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Yes. He left this for me." "Yes." She turned toward him. Her eyes were dry, but there was something burning behind them now. "Then I do not want his pity," she said. "I want the truth." Caleb looked at the locked door, then at the road stretching farther north beyond the ranch. And for the first time since he had met her, he understood that Clara Whitmore had not come west to be rescued. She had come west to belong somewhere. And if the man who promised her that belonging had lied, she would tear the lie apart with her own hands. Caleb opened the wagon gate for her. "Then we start with the truth," he said. But neither of them noticed the curtain move in the small back window of the empty house. For a long moment, Caleb and Clara stood beside the wagon without moving. The little ranch looked empty. The porch boards were gray with weather. A dry water bucket lay on its side near the steps. One shutter hung loose and tapped softly against the wall whenever the wind pushed through the yard. The corral gate had been tied shut with rope instead of fixed properly, and the barn door stood open just wide enough to show darkness inside. But Caleb's eyes had sharpened. He had spent too many years on lonely land not to know when something was wrong. Clara folded Nathan's note and placed it with the letters inside her coat. Her face had gone pale, but her mouth was firm. "Mr. Rourke," she said, "you saw something." Caleb looked toward the back window. "I thought I did." "What?" "A curtain moved." She turned at once. The window was still now, dark glass, faded curtain, nothing more. Clara took one step toward the house. Caleb caught her gently by the wrist, not hard enough to frighten her, only enough to stop her. "Wait." She looked down at his hand. He released her quickly. "I'm sorry," he said. "No," she answered, "you're right." That surprised him more than anger would have. Most people in fear either ran toward trouble or away from it. Clara did neither. She stood there, breathing carefully, thinking through the danger like it was a column of numbers that needed sorting. Caleb moved toward the side of the house, keeping his boots quiet in the dirt. Clara stayed by the wagon, though every part of her wanted to follow. She watched him pass the porch, circle the corner and disappear from sight. The wind seemed louder after he was gone. She heard a horse shift in the barn. Then a sharp crack came from behind the house. Not a gunshot, a board breaking. Clara's heart jumped. "Caleb," she called. No answer. She grabbed the side of the wagon, then forced herself to stay still. A moment later, Caleb came around the far corner, holding a boy by the back of his coat. The boy was maybe 14, thin as a fence rail with sandy hair, frightened eyes, and a face smudged with dust. He twisted once, then stopped when he saw Clara. "I didn't take nothing," the boy said quickly. "I swear." Caleb let go of his coat. "Then why were you hiding?" The boy looked at the ground. "I was sleeping in the shed." "This is Nathan Bell's place," Clara said. The boy glanced at her, then away. "It was." That one word hit harder than it should have. "Was." Caleb stepped closer. "What's your name?" "Tommy." "Tommy what?" "Tommy Reed." Caleb's expression changed slightly. "Ben Reed's boy." The boy's jaw tightened. "He was my uncle." Clara looked between them. Caleb's voice softened a little. "Your uncle died last winter." Tommy nodded. "Nathan hired me after, said I could sleep in the shed if I helped with chores. Then he left." "When?" "4 days ago." Clara's breath caught. 4 days ago. Nathan had not missed her train by accident. He had left before she arrived. "Did he say where he was going?" Caleb asked. Tommy shook his head. "No, packed a bag, took the bay horse. Said if a lady came asking, I was to stay out of sight." Clara took a slow step forward. "He told you to hide from me." Tommy looked ashamed, though the shame was not his. "Yes, ma'am." The wind pushed Clara's skirt against her boots. She looked at the house again, at the note on the porch post, at the empty windows. "Did he leave anything else?" Tommy hesitated. Caleb saw it. "Tommy." The boy swallowed. "There's papers in the desk. He said burn them if anyone came asking too many questions." Clara's eyes lifted to Caleb's. For the first time since the station, fear moved through her anger. "Papers?" she asked. Tommy nodded. Caleb looked toward the locked door. "Do you have a key?" The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small iron key tied to a string. Nathan Bell had left a boy to guard ashes and secrets. Inside, the house smelled cold. Not dirty exactly, but empty in a way that made every object feel abandoned. The stove had not been lit in days. A cup sat on the table with dried coffee at the bottom. A chair was pushed back as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned to set things right. Clara stepped inside carefully. This was the house from the letters. Or it was supposed to be. There was a table, yes. A window facing east, yes. A shelf with tin plates, yes, but nothing felt loved. Nothing felt prepared for a bride. No fresh curtain. No clean bedspread. No flowers, no extra cup set out, no sign that a man had been counting days to meet anyone. All those tender lines had been written by a man who had not even swept his own floor. Caleb opened the desk drawer. Inside were bills, receipts, old envelopes, and 3 folded letters tied with twine. He did not touch them at first. He looked at Clara. They may not be easy to read. They were left for burning, she said. That means I need to read them. Her voice shook only at the end. Caleb handed her the bundle. The first letter was not addressed to Nathan Bell. It was addressed to Henry Wallace, care of a post office in Kansas. Clara stared at the name. Henry Wallace. Tommy shifted near the door. He used that name sometimes, the boy said. Clara opened the second letter. Edward Miller. The third. Nathan Bell. 3 names, 3 towns, 3 sets of handwriting on old envelopes. Her fingers went cold inside her gloves. Caleb took one of the pages and read just enough for his eyes to darken. These are replies, he said. From women, Clara whispered. He did not answer. He did not have to. She took the paper from him and read the first few lines. Dear Mr. Wallace, your letter gave me hope when I had none left. Clara lowered the page. The room tilted around her. She had not been the only one. Nathan Bell, or Henry Wallace, or whatever name he wore when it suited him, had not simply changed his mind. He had made a habit of offering lonely women a future and then vanishing before the cost came due. Tommy stood near the door, twisting his cap. He said they were old, the boy murmured, said they didn't matter. Clara looked at the letters in her hands. They mattered to someone. Her voice was quiet, but Caleb heard the strength under it. Outside, the wind moved through the loose shutter, and the sound was like a warning. Caleb reached into the desk again and found a small notebook hidden beneath a loose board at the back of the drawer. He opened it, then went still. What is it? Clara asked. He turned the book toward her. Names. Women's names. Towns. Dates. Amounts of money. Beside Clara Whitmore's name, Nathan had written 2 words. Arrives Thursday. No regret, no explanation, just a note like a merchant tracking freight. Clara's hand rose to her mouth, but she did not cry. Caleb closed the book slowly. We're taking this to Sheriff Maddox, he said. Clara looked toward the window, where the late sun was turning the dusk gold. No, she said. Caleb frowned. No. We take it to the sheriff, yes, but not before we copy every name. Why? Because if there are other women, she said, holding the notebook tight, then someone should tell them the truth before he finds another town and another name. Caleb looked at her then, with something deeper than respect. A woman abandoned on a platform should have been thinking only of her own wound. Clara was thinking of strangers. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because Clara's pain is not the end of this trail. Sometimes the strongest love begins when one person refuses to let another face the truth alone. Caleb took off his hat and looked around that cold, loveless house. You can stay at Mrs. Dempsey's tonight, he said. Tomorrow we'll start with the sheriff. Clara turned toward him. And after that? He did not answer quickly. Because he already knew the boarding house money would run out. He already knew Cedar Ridge would talk. He already knew Nathan Bell's lies had left Clara stranded between shame and nowhere. And he knew, with a fear he did not want to name, that he could not put her back on a train and pretend this had nothing to do with him. After a long silence, he said, "After that, we'll see what kind of home the truth leaves standing." Clara looked at him, and for the first time, the word home did not sound like something Nathan Bell had stolen. It sounded like something Caleb Rourke might one day mean. Sheriff Elias Maddox did not like surprises before noon. He liked coffee, quiet streets, and crimes simple enough to fit into one sentence. Unfortunately, when Caleb Rourke and Clara Whitmore walked into his office the next morning with a notebook full of women's names, 3 false identities, and 1 frightened boy trailing behind them, the sheriff knew his day had already been ruined. He sat behind a scarred desk beneath a wall map of Laramie County, one hand wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. His gray mustache twitched as Clara laid the notebook on the desk. "What am I looking at?" he asked. Caleb stood beside her, hat in hand. "Nathan Bell's records," Caleb said, "or Henry Wallace's, or Edward Miller's. Depends which name he was using when he wrote them." Sheriff Maddox looked at Clara. "And you are?" "Clara Whitmore," she said. "I came to Cedar Ridge to marry Nathan Bell. He left before I arrived." The sheriff's eyes moved over her face, then down to the blue ribbon bundle in her hands. Something in his expression softened, but only for a second. Lawmen in small towns could not afford too much softness where others could see it. He opened the notebook. The first page changed him. His lazy morning face disappeared. He sat straighter, turned one page, then another. "Where did you get this?" "At Bell's ranch," Caleb said, "hidden in his desk." Sheriff Maddox looked at Tommy, who stood near the door with his cap crushed between both hands. "You were staying out there?" Tommy nodded. "He told me to burn the papers if anyone came asking." The sheriff let out a slow breath. "Did he pay you to say nothing?" "No, sir. Mostly he didn't pay me at all." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Clara watched the sheriff read. Her stomach felt hollow. Seeing the names in a lawman's hands made everything more real. They were no longer strange marks on paper. They were women somewhere in Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, and Colorado. Women who had written back with hope in their hearts. Women who may have packed trunks just as she had. Women who might still be waiting. Sheriff Maddox closed the notebook. "This is ugly," he said. "Yes," Clara answered. He looked at her carefully. "But ugly is not always easy to charge." Caleb stepped forward. He took money from some of them. "Maybe, if those amounts mean money received, maybe they mean money promised, maybe they mean travel costs. A judge will ask the same questions." The sheriff tapped the notebook. "I can send wires. I can warn other towns. I can speak to the marshal if Bell crossed county lines under false names, but finding him will take time." Clara had expected that. Still, the words hurt. Time was a cruel answer when someone had already stolen 6 months of a person's life. "Then send the wires," she said. Maddox studied her. "You sure you want your name attached to this?" Caleb looked at the sheriff sharply. Clara did not. She had already thought about it during the long night at Mrs. Dempsey's, while the boarding house slept and Cedar Ridge's wind dragged at the window glass. "No," she said honestly, "I do not want it." The sheriff waited. "But I want him stopped more than I want to be comfortable." For the first time, Maddox looked at her with true respect. "All right, Miss Whitmore." He reached for a clean sheet of paper. Caleb glanced at Clara. She stood very still, but he saw the small tremble in her right hand. He moved his hat from one hand to the other so he would not reach for her. She had not asked for comfort. Not yet. The sheriff wrote down the names. He asked Tommy questions. He took Clara's letters, copied the address and handwriting details, then returned them to her with unusual care. "Mrs. Deacon at the post office will help with wires," he said. "She keeps better records than most banks." Caleb gave a short nod. "She'll know what to do." Clara looked down at the letters. "Will you need me again?" "Likely," Maddox said. "Don't leave town without telling me." The words landed hard. Don't leave town. As if she had anywhere to go. When they stepped back into the street, morning had brightened over Cedar Ridge. A wagon rolled past with barrels stacked in the back. 2 boys ran by chasing a loose dog. A woman across the road looked at Clara, then whispered to the woman beside her. Clara heard none of the words, but she felt them. Caleb saw her shoulders stiffen. "People talk because silence makes them nervous," he said. She looked at him. "That sounds like something you learned the hard way." "I have learned most things the hard way." A small smile touched her mouth and vanished. They took Tommy to the cafe and ordered him breakfast. The boy ate like someone unsure when food might come again, both hands around the plate, eyes lowered. Clara watched him quietly. "How long were you alone at that ranch?" she asked. Tommy shrugged. "Long enough." "That is not an answer." He glanced at Caleb, then back at his plate. "Since Mr. Bell left." "And before that?" "He'd leave for days sometimes, told me to keep the stock watered." Tommy pushed beans onto his fork, said I was lucky to have a roof. Clara's face changed. Caleb knew that look. It was the look she had worn when she read the women's names, pain turning into purpose. "You have family?" she asked. Tommy shook his head. "Not close." Clara looked at Caleb. "He cannot go back there." Caleb leaned back slightly. He knew what was coming, yet he waited. "He can sleep in my barn room for now," Caleb said. Tommy looked up fast. "I can work." "I assumed you could." "I don't need charity." Caleb almost smiled. "No one at this table seems fond of charity." Clara lowered her eyes to hide the warmth that rose in them. It was not a grand thing. A boy needed a bed. Caleb had a barn room, but there was something in how he said it, no show, no pride, no speech about kindness, just a place offered because a place was needed. The same way he had offered her one. By afternoon, Clara went with Mrs. Deacon to the post office. Ruth Deacon was thin, straight-backed and sharp-eyed, with silver hair pinned so tightly it seemed not even a Wyoming storm could move it. She read the list of names once, then removed her spectacles and looked at Clara for a long moment. "Men who write under false names usually forget that women remember details," Ruth said. Clara liked her at once. Together they wrote short letters to the towns listed in the notebook, asking for confirmation of addresses and warning that Nathan Bell may have used other names. Ruth sent wires to the nearest sheriff offices and promised to watch every piece of mail passing through Cedar Ridge. When Clara thanked her, Ruth waved it away. "Truth is like mail," she said. "It may travel slowly, but it usually arrives." That evening, Caleb took Clara and Tommy back toward Willow Creek Ranch. Clara had meant to return to Mrs. Dempsey's, but snow clouds had gathered over the western hills, dark and low. The wind cut harder than it had that morning. Caleb slowed the wagon near the fork in the road. "Storm's coming," he said. "Town road will be mud by night." Clara looked toward Cedar Ridge, then toward the open land leading to his ranch. "You are saying I should not return to the boarding house tonight." "I am saying the weather is making that decision difficult." She looked at him with tired suspicion. "Mr. Rourke, do you ever say a thing plainly?" "When it helps. And when it does, I try not to make it worse." Tommy, sitting in the back, snorted into his sleeve. Clara almost laughed, but the wind stole the sound. Caleb's ranch appeared near dusk, low and sturdy against the wide Wyoming sky. The house was plain, with a stone chimney, a porch rail in need of repair, and warm light glowing behind the kitchen window. A barn stood to the left, and beyond it stretched pasture land fading into blue shadow. It was not the house Nathan had described. It was smaller, rougher, less polished. But there was smoke from the chimney. There was hay stacked clean beneath a tarp. There was a lantern waiting by the door. It looked lived in. It looked honest. Caleb helped Tommy down first, then turned to Clara. She accepted his hand because the step was high and the wind was sharp. His palm was warm through her glove. The contact lasted only a moment, but both of them felt it longer than that. Inside, the kitchen was simple and orderly in the way of a man who kept things because he needed them, not because they matched. A heavy table stood near the stove. 2 chairs, 1 extra stool, a shelf with tin cups, a brown coat hanging by the door. The room smelled of coffee, wood smoke, and cold air brought in on their clothes. Clara stood just inside the doorway. Caleb seemed suddenly aware of every rough board and plain corner. "It is not much," he said. She looked at the fire, the table, the clean cups, the folded towel near the basin. "It is warm," she said. That answer touched him more than praise would have. Tommy was sent to the barn room with a blanket and a plate of food. Caleb showed Clara the small spare room, which held a narrow bed, a chest, and a stack of old books on the floor. "My mother used this room when she was alive," he said quietly. "I have not changed much." Clara heard what he did not say. This room was not empty because he had forgotten it. It was empty because changing it would hurt. "I will be careful with it," she said. Caleb nodded once and stepped back. Later, after supper, the storm broke. Snow struck the windows in sharp little bursts. Wind moved around the house like a living thing trying every corner. Clara sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee between her hands. Caleb mended a harness strap near the stove. Neither spoke for a while. The silence did not feel empty. That frightened her a little. At last she looked at him. "Why did you not ask what I plan to do now?" Caleb kept his eyes on the leather strap. "Because I figured you would tell me when you knew. And if I never know, then I suppose we will start with tomorrow." She looked into her cup, feeling something inside her loosen and ache at the same time. For 6 months, Nathan Bell had promised her a future in beautiful words. Caleb Rourke had offered her tomorrow. Somehow tomorrow felt safer. Outside, the storm thickened over the Wyoming dark. Inside, the lantern flame trembled, and Clara realized she had stopped listening for footsteps that would never come. But far away, on the north road beyond Cedar Ridge, a rider in a dark coat was already moving through the snow, carrying the name Nathan Bell like a coat he planned to discard before morning. By morning, the storm had turned Willow Creek Ranch into a white, quiet world. Snow lay across the yard, over the fence rails, along the barn roof, and in soft drifts against the porch steps. The sky was pale and heavy, and the whole land seemed to be holding its breath. Inside the house, the fire had burned low but steady through the night, leaving the kitchen warm enough for Clara to wake before dawn without shivering. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She opened her eyes to the small spare room, the faded quilt, the stack of old books near the wall, and the thin line of gray morning at the window. Then everything returned. The station. Nathan's note. The hidden notebook. The women's names. Caleb's house in the storm. She sat up slowly and listened. From beyond the door came the sound of someone moving quietly in the kitchen. A stove lid lifted. Coffee poured. A chair shifted gently against the floor. The sounds were ordinary, but after so many days of uncertainty, ordinary felt almost like mercy. Clara dressed and pinned her hair with careful hands. She did not have many choices in clothing, only her traveling dress and a darker plain skirt and blouse from her trunk, but she smoothed the sleeves as if neatness could help her think clearly. When she stepped into the kitchen, Caleb was standing by the stove with a coffee pot in one hand. He looked up. "Morning." "Good morning." He poured coffee into a tin cup and set it near her place at the table. "I did not hear you knock," she said. "I didn't." She looked at him, confused. He nodded toward the cup, figured coffee was safer than conversation. Despite herself, Clara smiled. It was small, but Caleb saw it. Tommy came in a few minutes later, hair sticking up, boots not fully tied, looking both nervous and hungry. He stopped at the door as if waiting for permission to enter a room where warmth belonged to other people. Caleb pointed to the stool. "Sit before you fall over." Tommy sat. Clara cut bread and passed him the first slice. The boy took it with both hands, murmured thanks, and ate in silence. The morning settled around them in a strange peace. A man, a woman, a boy. None of them family. All of them sitting at one table because Nathan Bell had left damage behind him, and Caleb Rourke had not looked away from it. After breakfast, Caleb went out to break ice at the water trough and check the stock. Tommy followed, eager to prove he could earn his place. Clara stayed inside with the notebook spread open on the table, copying every name onto clean paper. There were 11. 11 women. Mary Ellis, Topeka, Kansas. Lydia Crane, Fort Collins, Colorado. Rose Harlan, Lincoln, Nebraska. Anna Bellwood, Independence, Missouri. Some entries had dates, some had amounts, some had marks Clara could not understand, but each name felt like a life, a room somewhere, a woman standing by a window, a letter folded under a pillow, a hope carefully hidden from people who might laugh at it. Clara copied each one slowly. Her own name appeared near the bottom. Clara Whitmore, St. Louis, arrives Thursday. She stared at those two words until the room blurred. Arrives Thursday. He had reduced her whole courage to an appointment he never meant to keep. The kitchen door opened, bringing in a burst of cold air and Caleb covered in snow across his shoulders. He shut the door quickly. "Stock's fine," he said. "Tommy knows his way around a barn better than he lets on." Clara looked up from the notebook. "There are 11 names." Caleb removed his gloves, his expression darkened. 11 that he wrote down. "Yes," she said, "that is what I keep thinking." He came to the table but did not sit. His eyes moved over the copied list. Clara touched one name with the end of her pencil. "I wonder if Mary Ellis waited at a station." Caleb said nothing. "I wonder if Lydia Crane's family told her she had been foolish. I wonder if Rose Harlan sold something precious to buy her ticket. I wonder if Anna Bellwood still has her letters." Her voice stayed controlled, but each question cut deeper than the last. Caleb pulled out the chair across from her and sat. "You cannot carry all of them." Clara looked at him. "No, but I can make sure they are not forgotten." His gaze softened only slightly. "I'll ride to town when the road clears. We'll send the copies." "We," she repeated. "Yes. You say that easily." He leaned back. "It is easier than letting you do it alone." Clara looked down at the notebook again, but the words had become less sharp. There were men who made promises like lantern light, bright enough to draw a traveler in and false enough to leave them in darkness. And then there were men who said little, but somehow moved a chair closer to the table so another person did not have to sit alone. By noon the storm had eased. The clouds broke in ragged strips, showing blue sky behind them. Sunlight struck the snow so brightly that the whole yard seemed to shine. Tommy came in laughing, truly laughing, with snow on his hat after slipping near the barn pump. Caleb followed him, trying not to smile and failing. "He went down like a sack of feed," Caleb said. "I did not," Tommy protested. "I caught myself." "With your back," Caleb said. Clara laughed before she could stop herself. The sound changed the room. Tommy looked pleased. Caleb looked at her in a way that made her suddenly busy with the coffee cups. That afternoon, Sheriff Maddox arrived with Ruth Deacon in a covered wagon. Ruth had wrapped herself in a dark wool coat and looked deeply offended by the weather, though not defeated by it. "I brought replies," she said, stepping into the kitchen as if she owned the threshold. "And news." Clara's hand tightened around the towel she was holding. Caleb took Ruth's coat and hung it by the door. The sheriff removed his hat and brushed snow from the brim. "Bell was seen north of Bracken past 2 nights ago," Maddox said, "traveling under the name Henry Wallace." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Headed where?" "Likely Montana if he keeps north, but he may turn east." Clara stood very still. "He is running." "Yes," the sheriff said, "but not cleanly. Men like that leave strings behind." Ruth placed 3 envelopes on the table. "These came after my wires, one from Kansas, one from Colorado, one from Nebraska." Clara looked at the envelopes as if they might burn her. Caleb's voice was low. "You do not have to read them now." "Yes," Clara said, "I do." She sat at the table and opened the first. It was from a sheriff in Topeka. Mary Ellis had indeed corresponded with a man calling himself Henry Wallace. She had sent him $20 to help repair a roof before her arrival. He disappeared before she traveled. Her family had kept the matter quiet. The second letter was worse. Lydia Crane of Fort Collins had traveled to meet Edward Miller. No one came. She returned home after 3 days, humiliated and nearly penniless. The third letter from Nebraska was written not by a sheriff, but by a woman named Rose Harlan herself. Clara read it aloud because her voice, once started, seemed to need to finish. "Miss Whitmore, I do not know you, but I know the feeling of standing where a promise should have been. If the same man has done this to you, then I am sorry, though sorry is too small a word. I was ashamed for a long time. I thought the shame belonged to me. It did not. Keep your head high. A liar's shadow is not your home." Clara stopped reading. The kitchen was quiet except for the fire. Ruth's face remained stern, but her eyes had softened. Tommy stared at the table. Sheriff Maddox looked out the window, giving Clara the mercy of not being watched too closely. Caleb stood behind the chair across from her, his hand resting on the wood. His knuckles were rough, clean, steady. Clara folded Rose Harlan's letter with care. "A liar's shadow is not your home," she said softly. "No," Caleb said, "it is." Their eyes met. For a moment, everything else in the room seemed to fall away. The sheriff, Ruth, the snow, the ugly notebook, the 11 names, all of it blurred behind one simple truth. Caleb had never promised her a home. Yet in his kitchen, surrounded by strangers who had become allies, she felt closer to one than she ever had reading Nathan's letters. Ruth cleared her throat, saving them both from the silence. "There is more," she said. Clara turned. Ruth reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small sealed envelope. "This came on the afternoon mail before we left town, addressed to Nathan Bell, forwarded from Kansas. I did not open it." Sheriff Maddox gave her a dry look. "You only brought it here." "I brought it to the investigation," Ruth said. "Do not make me regret my civic spirit." Caleb almost smiled. The sheriff took the envelope, inspected it, then opened it carefully with his knife. He unfolded the page and read. His face changed. "What is it?" Clara asked. Maddox looked at Caleb first, then at Clara. It appears Nathan Bell has a wife. The room went completely still. Clara's chair scraped softly as she stood. A wife. The sheriff held the letter out. The handwriting was a woman's, tight and tired. Nathan, you cannot keep running each time your debts catch up. The children ask where you are. I have told them you are working because I do not know what else to say. Come back to Abilene before you shame us past repair. Martha. Clara did not take the letter. She only stared at it. A wife, children, a life hidden behind all those beautiful promises. The pain that moved through her then was different from the first wound. Sharper, cleaner, almost cold. Nathan had not simply abandoned her. He had tried to make her part of a lie that already had victims waiting at home. Caleb stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel he was there. Clara, he said quietly. She looked at him, and the control in her face finally cracked, just enough to show the hurt beneath. I was going to marry him, she whispered. I know. I was going to stand beside him, believing I had chosen an honest man. I know. Her voice trembled. How can a person write of home while stealing it from everyone around him? No one answered. Because no one could. If you believe one honest hand can pull someone out of another man's lie, don't forget to like this story and stay close. Clara has learned the truth now, but the hardest choice is still ahead of her. That night after Ruth and the sheriff left, Clara stepped onto the porch alone. The snow reflected the moonlight, turning the yard silver. The air was bitter, but she welcomed it. It made breathing feel like work, and work was better than breaking. Behind her, the door opened. Caleb came out with her shawl. You forgot this. She accepted it, wrapping it around her shoulders. Thank you. He leaned against the porch post, keeping a respectful distance. For a while, they watched the pale fields. I should feel relieved, she said. Why? Because now I know. There is no question left. No reason to wonder if he was hurt, delayed, afraid, or confused. He was simply cruel. Caleb's jaw tightened. Yes. But I do not feel relieved. No. She turned toward him. Have you ever been made a fool of? The question surprised him. A shadow crossed his face, and for the first time, Clara saw a door inside him that had been kept shut for years. Yes, he said. She waited. The wind moved between them. Caleb looked toward the barn, where a lantern glowed faintly in the window. Her name was Abigail Porter, he said. I was 29. She said she wanted the ranch life, said she admired plain men and plain work. His voice was calm, but Clara could hear old pain under it. What happened? She married a banker in Cheyenne 2 weeks before our wedding. Clara's hand tightened around the shawl. Caleb. She wrote me a letter, said she had mistaken gratitude for love. He looked down at his hands. Maybe she had, maybe I had too. After that, I decided promises were best kept small. Clara thought of the coffee he left outside her door, the room he offered without speech, the way he had let her make decisions even when he feared them. Small promises. Kept. That is why you do not say much, she said. That is part of it. And the other part. He looked at her then. The other part is that when I do say something, I need it to be true. The words settled over Clara, more gently than any confession could have. She looked away first, because if she kept looking at him, she feared something in her would step too far ahead of reason. Far beyond the white fields, a coyote called once. Inside the barn, Tommy coughed. Life waited. Pain waited too. But for the first time since Clara had stepped off the train, she did not feel like the abandoned woman at the station. She felt like someone standing at the edge of a different road. Then Caleb straightened suddenly, his eyes fixed on the far ridge. Clara followed his gaze. A dark shape moved against the snow beyond the fence line. A rider. Slow, careful, watching the ranch. Caleb's hand moved to the porch rail. "Go inside," he said. Clara's heart began to pound. "Is it him?" Caleb did not answer. The rider stopped on the ridge for one long moment, then turned his horse and disappeared into the dark. Caleb did not sleep much that night. He told Clara it was probably only a passing rider. He told Tommy to keep the barn door barred because of the cold. He checked the horses, walked the fence near the yard, and stood for a long while under the porch roof, watching the ridge where the dark shape had appeared and vanished. But he knew what he had seen. A man did not ride that slowly along another man's fence line in winter, unless he wanted to be noticed or wanted to measure the place before coming closer. By dawn, the snow had hardened into a bright crust over the ground. The cold had a clean bite to it. Clara came into the kitchen with her hair pinned low and her eyes tired, but her face was steady. Caleb was already at the stove. "You were outside most of the night," she said. He looked at her over the coffee pot. "Some." "That means yes." "That means some." She took the cup he offered but did not sit. "Do you think it was Nathan?" Caleb wiped one hand on a towel and looked toward the window. "I think whoever it was wanted to see if you were here." Clara held the cup tighter. "And if it was him, then he is either desperate or foolish." "Could be both," Tommy said from the doorway. They turned. The boy stood there in an oversized coat Caleb had given him, his face pale but serious. He looked younger in the morning light, but there was something hard in his eyes, the look of a child who had learned too early that adults could be dangerous. Caleb pointed to the chair. "Sit." Tommy sat, but kept his hands folded tight on the table. "He came back sometimes," the boy said. Caleb went still. Clara lowered her cup. "What do you mean?" she asked gently. Tommy stared at a crack in the tabletop. "When Mr. Bell would leave the ranch, he'd say he was going for business. Sometimes he'd come back late after dark and check the desk, count the papers, look through the letters." He swallowed. "One night he came back angry, said some woman in Kansas had been writing questions, said women were trouble once they started thinking." Clara's expression changed, not with fear this time but with disgust. Caleb's voice stayed quiet. "Did he ever speak of a wife?" Tommy nodded once. "Not like a wife. He said there was a woman back east who thought she owned him." Clara looked away. The fire cracked in the stove. For a while no one spoke. Then Clara placed her cup on the table and sat across from Tommy. "You did not cause any of this," she said. Tommy shrugged, but his mouth trembled. "I kept quiet. You were a boy without anywhere to go. I still knew it was wrong." Caleb leaned forward. Knowing a thing is wrong is not the same as having power to stop it. Tommy looked at him with a kind of hunger, as if he wanted badly to believe that. Clara reached for the copied list of women's names lying near the lamp. "Then we stop it now," she said. "Together." That word "together" changed the room. Tommy sat straighter. Caleb watched Clara in silence. The morning sun came through the frosted window and touched the side of her face, turning the loose strands of auburn hair almost gold. She had been abandoned, lied to, and shamed in front of a town. Yet here she was, making room for a frightened boy inside the word "together." Caleb felt something in his chest pull tight. By mid-morning, Sheriff Maddox arrived again, this time on horseback, with snow on his coat and bad news in his face. Caleb met him in the yard. Clara came out onto the porch before either man could stop her. She wrapped her shawl tight and stood by the rail. The sheriff removed his hat. "We found where Bell stopped last night," he said. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Where?" "Old Miller Line shack north of town. Fire still warm when my deputy reached it." "So he is close," Clara said. Maddox looked at her. "Close enough." "Did he leave anything?" The sheriff hesitated. Caleb noticed. Clara did too. "What did he leave?" she asked. Maddox pulled a folded paper from inside his coat. It was nailed to the door. Caleb stepped forward. "Sheriff." But Clara had already held out her hand. Maddox gave it to her. The note was short, written in a hurried hand she knew too well. "Clara, you have been misled by people who do not understand our arrangement. I made a mistake leaving, but you made a worse one by putting private matters into public hands. Give back what you took from my desk, and I will let you leave Cedar Ridge without disgrace." And B. For 1 second, no one moved. Then Clara laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was sharp and stunned, like a woman realizing a snake still believed it had the right to call itself a rope. "Let me leave without disgrace," she said softly. Caleb's face had gone hard. Maddox said, "I have men watching both roads. He is nervous now. Nervous men do foolish things." "He wants the notebook," Caleb said. "Yes." Clara folded the letter. "Then he is afraid of it." Maddox looked at her with approval. "That would be my guess." "What happens next?" "We keep the notebook safe. I send another wire to the marshal. If Bell comes near you, he will answer for it." Clara looked toward the white fields, then back at the sheriff. "And his wife?" Maddox's expression softened. "I sent a wire to Abilene this morning. If Martha Bell is there, she will know soon." Clara closed her eyes for a brief moment. Not in relief. In sorrow. Because somewhere far from Willow Creek Ranch, another woman was about to have her life broken open by the truth. After the sheriff left, Caleb hitched the wagon. "Where are we going?" Clara asked. "To town." "Why?" "Because I need supplies, and you need to speak to Ruth." She studied him. "And because you do not want me sitting here waiting for fear to grow." He paused with one hand on the harness. "That too." Tommy came with them, sitting in the back wrapped in a blanket, proud to be trusted outside the ranch. The ride to Cedar Ridge was cold but bright. Snow flashed under the sun. The horses snorted clouds into the air. Clara sat beside Caleb, the new letter folded in her pocket like a coal that would not cool. When they reached town, people noticed them at once. Of course they did. Cedar Ridge had been built of wood, dust, cattle money, and other people's business. Clara stepped down from the wagon in front of the post office. A man across the street stopped sweeping. 2 women near the mercantile went silent. Dottie from the cafe leaned toward the window, eyes wide. Clara felt every look. Then Caleb came around the wagon and stood beside her, not too close, not claiming, simply there. That helped. Ruth Deacon opened the post office door before they reached it. "I was expecting you," she said. Caleb frowned. "How?" Ruth looked at him, as if he had asked why winter was cold. "Because trouble travels faster than mail." Inside, the post office smelled of paper, ink, and stove heat. Ruth took Nathan's note and read it once. "He writes like a man who thinks shame belongs to everyone but him," she said. Clara looked at her. "That is exactly it." Ruth placed the note on the counter. "I have another reply." Clara's heart tightened. "From who?" "Lydia Crane, Fort Collins." Ruth handed her an envelope. Clara opened it carefully. Lydia's handwriting was round and gentle, but the words carried old pain. She wrote that she had once waited 3 days for Edward Miller, only to learn he had left town before she arrived. She had gone home with empty pockets and a broken heart. For months, she believed she had been foolish. Then she learned from Clara's warning that the foolishness had never been hers. Near the end, Lydia wrote one line Clara read twice. "If you are still standing near the wreckage, Miss Whitmore, do not mistake the wreckage for your worth." Clara lowered the letter. Ruth pretended to sort mail. Caleb looked toward the window. Tommy, who had been watching silently, whispered, "She writes nice." Clara smiled through the ache in her chest. "Yes," she said, "she does." They spent the next hour writing more letters. Clara wrote with careful honesty, never dramatic, never begging for sympathy. She named the false names. She explained what had been found. She asked each woman if willing to send any proof that might help the law stop him. By the time she finished, her hand hurt. Caleb noticed her flexing her fingers. "Enough for today," he said. "I can do one more." "You can," he said, "but you should not." She looked up, ready to argue. He held her gaze. There was no command in his face, only concern. That was harder to resist. "All right," she said. When they stepped outside, the town had changed. Not much, not openly. But enough. Mrs. Dempsey stood outside the boarding house and gave Clara a firm nod. Dottie waved from the cafe window. The barber, who had stared too long the day before, tipped his hat with awkward respect. The story had begun as gossip. Now it was becoming something else. Truth had a way of making people ashamed of their first opinions. Caleb helped Tommy load supplies into the wagon. Clara stood near the post office steps, watching Cedar Ridge move around her. For the first time, the town did not feel like the place where she had been abandoned. It felt like the place where she had stood up. Then a voice spoke behind her. "Miss Whitmore." She turned. A well-dressed man stood a few feet away, wearing a black coat too fine for ranch work and gloves too clean for travel. He was handsome in a polished way, with a smooth smile and watchful eyes. "I'm Franklin Voss," he said. "I own the bank." Clara nodded carefully. "Mr. Voss." "I heard about your difficulty," he said. "Terrible business." His sympathy sounded practiced. Clara said nothing. "If you find yourself needing advice, financial or otherwise, my door is open." His smile deepened slightly. "A woman in your position should have someone respectable guiding her next steps." Before Clara could answer, Caleb appeared beside the wagon. He did not speak. He only looked at Franklin Voss. The banker's smile tightened. Clara felt the air shift between the two men. "Thank you," she said, her voice cool, "but I am already receiving sound guidance." Franklin glanced at Caleb. "From Mr. Rourke." "From the truth," Clara said. Tommy snorted from the wagon and quickly looked away. Franklin's face hardened for half a second, then smoothed again. "Of course, good day, Miss Whitmore." He walked away. Caleb watched him go. Clara turned to him. "You do not like him." "No." "Why?" Caleb's mouth tightened. "He holds debts on half this town and kindness from none of it." Clara looked back at Franklin's polished black coat as he entered the bank. Something about the man's words had left a chill colder than the weather. "A woman in your position." As if her position were weakness. As if weakness were an invitation. On the ride home, the sky turned gray again. Tommy dozed in the back. Clara sat close enough to Caleb that her sleeve brushed his coat whenever the wagon hit a rut. Neither mentioned it. Halfway to the ranch, Caleb spoke. "If Bell comes, I do not want you stepping outside to face him." Clara looked at him. "You think I would?" "I think you are brave enough to do things that are not wise." She considered that. Fair. He glanced at her, surprised. She looked ahead. And you are protective enough to think silence counts as a plan. His mouth almost curved. Also fair. The wagon rolled on. After a while, Clara said, I am afraid, Caleb. It was the first time she had said his name without Mr. Rourke. He heard it. He felt it. His hands tightened on the reins. I know. But I am more afraid of letting him make me small. Caleb looked at her then, and the gray light softened around her face. He cannot do that, he said. You sound certain. I am. Why? Because I saw you on that platform, he said. You had every reason to fold in on yourself. You didn't. Clara's throat tightened. I felt folded. You still sat straight. The words were plain, simple, Caleb's kind of truth. And somehow they warmed her more than any fine speech could have. They reached Willow Creek near dusk. The yard was quiet. The barn lantern glowed. The house waited with its square windows and honest walls. Tommy jumped down and ran to check the horses. Clara stepped from the wagon, but her boot slipped on the packed snow. Caleb caught her by the waist. Only for a second. Her hands landed against his chest. His coat was cold beneath her fingers, but she could feel the steady strength of him under it. They stood too close. The world went silent around them. Caleb's eyes searched hers, careful, restrained, full of things he did not know how to say. Clara did not move away. Then a sound broke the moment. A faint crack from inside the house. Caleb turned sharply. The front door stood open. He knew he had latched it. He stepped in front of Clara at once. Stay behind me. This time she did not argue. Inside, the kitchen had been searched. The desk drawer hung open. Papers lay scattered across the floor. A chair was overturned. The little stack of letters from Lydia and Rose had been thrown near the stove. And on the kitchen table, stabbed through with Caleb's own skinning knife, was another note. Caleb pulled it free and read it. His face darkened like a storm over the plains. Clara stepped beside him and looked down. 4 words were written across the page. Give me the notebook. The knife in the table made the whole kitchen feel colder than the snow outside. Clara stared at the 4 words until they seemed to grow larger on the page. Give me the notebook. The house was silent around them. Too silent. The kind of silence that came after someone had touched things he had no right to touch. The chair on its side, the open drawer, papers across the floor, the letters scattered like wounded birds near the stove. Caleb stood still, but every part of him had changed. His face held no panic, no loud anger. That almost frightened Clara more. His anger had gone quiet, and quiet anger in a man like Caleb Rourke felt like a storm still beyond the hills, not seen yet but already coming. Tommy appeared in the doorway behind them, breathless from the barn. What happened? Caleb turned quickly. Stay outside. But Tommy saw the kitchen. His eyes went to the knife, then the note. His face lost color. He came here, the boy whispered. Clara moved toward him at once. Tommy, did you see anyone? He shook his head. No, I was with the horses. I swear I barred the barn like you said. No one is blaming you, Clara said. Caleb pulled the knife from the table and set it near the stove, away from Clara's reach and Tommy's shaking eyes. He was looking for the notebook, he said. Clara drew a breath. He did not find it. No. The notebook was not in the house. Sheriff Maddox had taken the original and locked it in his office. Clara's copies were hidden in Ruth Deacon's post office ledger room. Nathan Bell had broken into Willow Creek Ranch for nothing. But that did not make the room safer. It only made him more desperate. Caleb checked the back door, then the windows, then the pantry. He moved through the house with a steady care that made Clara understand he had searched buildings before. Maybe for lost calves during storms. Maybe for men who had no right entering them. He looked behind doors, under beds, inside the spare room, and finally returned to the kitchen. "He's gone," he said. Tommy sat down hard on the stool. Clara started picking up the letters from the floor. Caleb turned and saw her kneeling near the stove. "Leave those." "No." "Clara." She looked up. Her eyes were bright but not with tears. "He already scattered enough lives," she said. "He does not get to scatter these too." Caleb stopped. Then he crouched beside her and helped gather the papers. Together they placed every letter back on the table. Rose Harlan's letter, Lydia Crane's reply, Nathan's threatening note, Martha Bell's tired words from Abilene. Each page had become part of a truth too large for one woman to hold alone. Tommy watched them, then quietly picked up a page that had slid beneath the chair. By the time Sheriff Maddox arrived an hour later, the kitchen was back in order, but the mark from the knife remained in the table. The sheriff listened without interrupting. He read the note, studied the door latch, then walked outside with Caleb to inspect the tracks. Clara watched them from the porch, wrapped in her shawl, the cold biting at her cheeks. Tommy stood beside her. "I should have seen him," he said. "You are not responsible for a grown man's wrong choices. He told me once that folks only say that when they want a boy to feel better." Clara looked at him. "Then he lied about that too." Tommy blinked. She softened her voice. "People who use shame as a rope do not like it when someone cuts the rope." The boy looked toward the snowy yard. "Are you scared?" "Yes," Clara said. He seemed surprised by her honesty. "So am I," he admitted. Clara placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Then we will be scared and careful. Both can be true." In the yard, Caleb and Sheriff Maddox followed boot prints to the side fence. The tracks came from the north ridge, crossed behind the barn, then circled to the kitchen door. There was another set too, horse tracks, waiting beyond the cottonwoods. "He had someone with him?" Caleb asked. "Maybe," Maddox said, "or he tied the horse out and came on foot." Caleb looked toward the ridge. "He is watching the house. He wants to frighten her into handing over the evidence." "That won't work." Maddox glanced toward the porch, where Clara stood straight in the winter light. "No," he said, "I am beginning to understand that." The sheriff left 2 hours later with a promise to send a deputy by after dark. He also carried the new note, wrapped carefully in cloth, another piece of Nathan Bell's own hand tying him to his lies. But when the sheriff rode away, the ranch felt larger and more exposed than before. That evening, Caleb moved Tommy into the house. The boy protested at first, saying the barn room was fine, but Caleb only carried in the extra blanket and pointed toward the floor near the stove. "You can argue in the morning." Tommy did not argue. Clara made supper because she needed her hands busy. Beans, bread, coffee, and a thin stew that Caleb claimed was good even though she knew it needed more salt. They ate quietly. Every sound outside made Tommy look toward the door. Every gust of wind made Clara's fingers tighten around her spoon. Caleb noticed all of it. After supper, he checked the latch again. Then, without a word, he dragged the heavy trunk from the spare room and placed it against the kitchen door. Clara watched him. "That is my trunk." "Yes." "You are using my trunk as a wall." "Best use it has had all day." Despite the fear, Clara almost smiled. Tommy looked at the trunk and said, "It's a good trunk." "It came a long way," Clara said. Caleb turned from the door. "So did you." The words were simple, but they reached her. For a moment the kitchen softened. The firelight moved over Caleb's face. catching the tired lines near his eyes. Clara saw the man who had stopped at the station, the man who carried her trunk, the man who gave a boy a bed, the man who spoke rarely because truth mattered too much to waste. She also saw the loneliness he tried to keep covered beneath work. Maybe that was what drew her heart toward him when reason told it to slow down. Not only his kindness, not only his strength, but the quiet wound in him that matched something in her own. Later, when Tommy slept near the stove, Clara stood by the window and looked out at the moonlit snow. Caleb came to stand a few feet away. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." "I will." "No, you will sit in that chair by the door until morning." He did not deny it. Clara turned from the window. "Caleb, I do not want you hurt because of me." His eyes met hers. "This is not because of you. He followed me here. He followed the truth here." She looked down. "That sounds noble, but it does not make me feel better." "I was not trying to sound noble." "No," she said softly, "you never do." The quiet between them changed. The fire snapped behind them. Tommy breathed softly in sleep. Outside, the wind moved over the roof in long, lonely waves. Clara folded her arms, not from cold, but because she needed something to hold. "When I left St. Louis," she said, "my aunt told me I was mistaking letters for love. I was angry at her. I thought she was bitter because her own life had been hard." Caleb listened. She was not entirely wrong. "You could not have known." "I keep telling myself that. I keep hearing everyone say it. But there is a part of me that still asks why I did not see him clearly." Caleb stepped closer, slow enough that she could move away if she wished. "Because you were looking for a future," he said, "not a trap." Her throat tightened. "I wanted to be chosen." The confession came out so quietly that she almost wished he had not heard it. But he had. Caleb's face changed in the firelight, as if those words had touched an old sorrow in him. "So did I," he said. Clara looked up. He looked toward the stove, toward the sleeping boy, toward anywhere that was not her eyes. But then he seemed to decide that half-truths were not enough for this moment. "When Abigail left," he said, "I told myself it was because I was not enough, not polished enough, not rich enough, not easy enough to love." His hand rested on the back of a chair. "After a while, I decided wanting to be chosen was the dangerous part." Clara's heart ached at the plainness of it. "And now?" He finally looked at her. "Now I am less sure." The words were not a proposal, not a confession, not yet. But they were a door opening. Clara took one step closer. "Caleb." He grew very still at the sound of his name. Before either of them could say more, a hard knock struck the front door. Tommy jolted awake. Caleb moved in front of Clara at once. The knock came again. 3 slow hits. Then a man's voice from the other side of the door. "Rourke, open up, I know she's in there." Clara's blood went cold. Caleb reached for the rifle above the shelf, but kept it pointed down. "Stay behind me," he said. This time, Clara did not move. The voice outside came again, smoother now, almost amused. "Clara, sweetheart, you have made enough trouble. Come out and let us settle this like civilized people." Her hands curled into fists. That voice. The one from the letters. The one she had imagined reading aloud by lamplight. The one that had promised her a home. Nathan Bell stood on the other side of Caleb Rourke's door. And Clara realized that the man she had traveled west to marry had finally come for her only after she became dangerous to him. Caleb held the rifle low, but his whole body stood between Clara and the door. The room had gone still. Tommy was sitting upright on his blanket near the stove, eyes wide, face white in the firelight. Clara stood behind Caleb with both hands pressed together, not in prayer, but to stop them from shaking. Outside, Nathan Bell waited in the cold. He knocked again, harder this time. "Rourke," he called, "I am not here for a fight." Caleb's voice was flat. "Then you chose a poor way to visit." A small laugh came from the other side of the door. Smooth, familiar, wrong. Clara felt sick hearing it. For 6 months, she had imagined that voice saying her name with tenderness. She had built a whole man out of ink, paper, and hope. Now the real man stood outside like a thief at the edge of the light, asking to be treated as if he had only misplaced his manners. "Clara," Nathan called, "you and I need to speak alone." Caleb did not look back at her. "No," he said. "I did not ask you." And she did not come to the door. There was a pause. Then Nathan's voice sharpened. "You have no idea what she and I arranged." Clara stepped forward before Caleb could stop her. He turned his head slightly. "Clara." "I will speak," she said. His eyes held a warning, but also trust. That trust strengthened her more than any order could have. She stood near the center of the kitchen, far from the door, with Caleb still between her and the man outside. "Nathan," she said. The sound of his name in her mouth felt like touching cold iron. Outside, he softened his voice at once. "There you are. I knew you would listen to reason." "No," she said. "I am listening to the truth now." A bitter silence followed. Then Nathan said, "You are angry, I understand that. I made a mistake leaving that note. I should have met your train and explained." "Explained what?" Clara asked. "Your wife, your children, the other women, the false names." Tommy looked at the floor. Caleb's jaw flexed. Outside, Nathan made a sound like a man deeply wounded by unfairness. "You have been reading things you do not understand." "I understand names. I understand dates. I understand money written beside women who trusted you." "You trusted me because you wanted to." That sentence entered the room like smoke. Clara went very still. Caleb's hand tightened on the rifle. "Careful," he said. Nathan ignored him. "Clara, be honest. You were lonely. You wanted a way out of St. Louis. I offered one. Maybe I said too much. Maybe you heard too much. But do not make me into a criminal because you are embarrassed." For one moment, the old shame tried to rise inside her. It whispered that he was right, that she had wanted too much, that she had believed too quickly, that every whisper in Cedar Ridge would now follow her forever. Then she looked at Caleb's table, still scarred where Nathan had stabbed the note down. She looked at Tommy, the boy Nathan had left hungry and afraid. She thought of Rose Harlan's letter. "A liar's shadow is not your home." Clara lifted her chin. "I am not embarrassed because I hoped for a good life," she said. "You should be embarrassed because you used that hope like bait." The room fell silent. Outside, Nathan's charm cracked. "Give me the notebook." "No. It does not belong to you." "Neither did my trust." A hard sound came from the porch, a boot shifting, a breath pulled through anger. Caleb angled slightly toward the door. "Sheriff has the notebook," he said. "You broke into the wrong house for nothing." Nathan cursed under his breath. Clara heard the real man beneath the letters then, not lonely, not gentle, not wounded by love, only cornered. "You think Maddox can hold me," Nathan said. "You think a few women's sad letters will send me to prison. Half of them will be too ashamed to speak. The other half will want the matter forgotten." Clara's stomach turned. He was not guessing. He had built his lies on that belief. That women would hide their hurt to protect their names. That shame would do his work for him. "You are wrong," she said. Nathan laughed coldly. "Am I?" A second voice came from the yard. Yes, Sheriff Maddox said, you are. Everything changed at once. Caleb moved to the window and looked out without exposing himself. Clara heard the shuffle of horses, the crunch of boots in snow, the low sound of men spreading around the porch. Nathan had gone quiet. Sheriff Maddox called from the yard, "Step away from the door, Bell. Hands where I can see them." There was no answer. Then a sudden thud hit the porch boards. Tommy flinched. Caleb pulled the door open, just enough to see. Nathan Bell was running. He had jumped from the porch and was cutting across the snowy yard toward the cottonwoods, where a dark horse waited tied behind the shed. "Stay inside," Caleb told Clara. Then he was out the door. This time Clara did not follow into danger. She went to the window instead, hands on the sill, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Moonlight washed the yard in silver. Nathan slipped once in the snow, caught himself, and ran toward the trees. Sheriff Maddox and his deputy moved after him from the side of the barn. Caleb crossed the yard fast, not reckless but determined. Nathan reached his horse. For one sharp second, Clara thought he might escape again. Then Tommy shouted from inside the house, "The back cinch!" Caleb heard him. So did Nathan, too late. The horse lunged forward, but the saddle shifted hard to one side. Nathan had tied it in haste. He hit the ground with a heavy cry, not wounded badly, only knocked from his own carelessness. Before he could rise, Sheriff Maddox and the deputy were on him. Caleb stopped a few steps away, breathing hard. Nathan twisted in the snow, shouting that he had done nothing worth chains, that Clara was lying, that the boy was a thief, that Rourke had stolen what belonged to him. Clara opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Caleb turned at once. He did not tell her to go back this time. Nathan saw her and went still. Even with snow on his coat and fear in his eyes, he tried one last smile. "Clara," he said, breathless, "tell them this is a misunderstanding." She walked down one porch step. The cold hit her face, clean and sharp. She looked at the man she had crossed half the country to marry. He was not taller than other men, not stronger, not even especially handsome now that the lie had left his face. He was only a man who had learned how to sound like a dream to women who needed one. "No," Clara said, "the misunderstanding is over." Sheriff Maddox pulled Nathan to his feet. Nathan's eyes hardened. "You will regret this." Caleb stepped forward. But Clara raised one hand slightly. She did not need Caleb to answer for her. "I already regret believing you," she said. "I will not regret stopping you." The sheriff took Nathan toward the road, where another horse waited. The deputy gathered Nathan's reins. Snow continued falling lightly, covering the broken tracks almost as soon as they were made. Tommy came to the doorway, wrapped in a blanket. "He's really caught?" he asked. Maddox looked back. "For tonight, yes, and with the wires coming in, likely longer than he expects." Ruth Deacon had been right. Truth traveled slowly. But it had arrived. If you have stayed with Clara this far, tell me in the comments what you would have said to Nathan at that door. Some moments do not need loud revenge. Sometimes the strongest justice is a woman finally speaking without fear. When the sheriff rode away with Nathan Bell, Willow Creek Ranch did not become peaceful all at once. Fear did not leave like a door shutting. It faded slowly, like smoke after a lamp is blown out. Caleb checked the yard again. Tommy helped him bring the loose horse to the barn. Clara went inside and found herself standing beside the table, staring at the knife mark in the wood. Nathan was gone. But the mark remained. Caleb came in quietly and saw her looking at it. "I can plane it down," he said. Clara touched the scar in the table. "No." He studied her face. She looked up at him. "Leave it." "Why?" Because someday, she said, I want to remember that this was the night he came demanding the truth back and left without it. Caleb's eyes softened. Tommy came in from the cold, stamping his boots. I told you about the cinch, he said, trying to sound casual and failing. Caleb looked at him. You did. Saved you a run. Maybe. Tommy grinned for the first time since the break-in. Clara turned to him. You noticed what mattered. The boy's grin faded into something quieter, something almost proud. The rest of the night passed in pieces. Coffee reheated. The fire built up. Wet coats hung near the stove. Tommy eventually fell asleep again, one hand under his cheek, looking more like a child than he had since Clara met him. Caleb sat at the table across from her. Neither of them had the strength for many words. Outside, the wind eased. Clara looked at the scar in the table, then at Caleb's hands resting near his cup. I thought seeing him caught would make me feel whole again, she said. Caleb listened. It does not. No, he said gently. Truth does not always heal on the same day it arrives. She breathed out slowly. What does? His eyes met hers. Time, work, people who stay. The words moved through her softly. People who stay. She looked toward the spare room, toward the trunk that had blocked the door, toward the kitchen that had held her fear without turning her away. Then she looked at Caleb. You stayed, she said. He was quiet for a long moment. So did you. That answer reached something deep in her heart. Not because it was romantic in the way Nathan's letters had been. It was not polished or pretty. It did not ask to be admired. It was true. Clara had stayed through shame, through fear, through the cold facts of another man's lies. Caleb had stayed beside her without trying to own her choices. Two people, both wounded by promises that failed, had somehow found steadiness in the space between them. The fire burned low. Tommy slept. The house creaked softly in the easing wind. Caleb looked down at his cup, then back at Clara. I need to say something, he said. Her heart began to beat harder. Then say it. He swallowed once. I know this is not the time. That is a poor beginning. It is honest. That almost made her smile. He turned the cup slowly between his hands. When I found you at the station, I thought I was helping for one night, then one day, then until the truth was found. He paused, but somewhere along the way I stopped thinking of this as helping. Clara did not move. Caleb's voice grew quieter. I started thinking of the house differently when you were in it. The table, the stove, even the quiet. He looked at her then, steady and afraid. I do not know what to call that without asking too much of you. Clara felt the room blur, not with tears exactly, but with feeling too large for the small kitchen. You are not asking. No. But you want to. He looked down, and in that small movement she saw the lonely man beneath the strong one. Yes. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. His hand went still beneath hers. Caleb, she said softly, do not ask me tonight. Pain moved across his face, but he nodded at once. Of course. She tightened her fingers around his before he could pull away. Ask me when the answer can come from hope instead of hurt. He looked at her then. The firelight caught in his eyes. For the first time since Nathan Bell had knocked on his door, Caleb looked less like a man guarding a house and more like a man seeing a future stand just out of reach. I can wait, he said. Clara believed him. That was the difference. Nathan had made waiting feel like abandonment. Caleb made waiting feel like care. Outside, the snow stopped falling. Above Willow Creek Ranch, the clouds began to break, and a few cold stars appeared over the dark Wyoming hills. Morning came clear and cold over Willow Creek Ranch. The storm had passed during the night, leaving the sky washed clean and bright. Snow lay over the fields in smooth white sheets, broken only by wagon tracks, horse prints, and the dark line of the fence stretching toward the eastern ridge. The house felt different in the morning light. Not safe exactly, but steadier, as if it had survived something and was now waiting to learn what came next. Clara woke before sunrise. For a few quiet minutes, she stayed in the spare room and looked at the ceiling. She could still hear Nathan's voice in memory, smooth and blaming, trying to turn his lies into her shame. She could still see him in the snow, caught at last, his fine words stripped down to fear. But what stayed with her most was Caleb across the kitchen table, his hand under hers. "Do not ask me tonight. Ask me when the answer can come from hope instead of hurt." She had meant every word. And now, with daylight pressing softly against the window, she wondered how long it took for hurt to loosen its grip enough for hope to speak clearly. In the kitchen, Caleb was already awake. Of course he was. He stood by the stove, sleeves rolled to his forearms, making coffee with the careful focus of a man who had decided breakfast was easier than emotion. The knife mark still cut across the table. Clara noticed he had not covered it. Tommy slept near the stove under two blankets, one arm thrown over his face. He had grown used to eating, warmth, and being spoken to as if his opinion mattered, but sleep still took him like someone stealing rest while he could. Caleb looked up when Clara entered. "Morning." "Good morning." His voice was normal, too normal. Her heart almost smiled at it. He poured her coffee and set it down. Neither mentioned the night before. That, too, was Caleb's way. He did not pull at feelings to see if they were ready. He waited until they came to the table on their own. Tommy woke when the bacon hit the pan. He sat up suddenly. "I'm awake." Caleb glanced over. That is usually how waking works. Clara bit back a smile. Tommy pushed hair from his eyes. "Did the sheriff come back?" "Not yet," Caleb said. "He will." "Bell won't get loose, will he?" Caleb did not answer too quickly. Clara appreciated that. "He may try," Caleb said. "But Maddox has the notebook, the letters, the break-in note, and witnesses. Men like Bell depend on quiet. He no longer has it." Tommy nodded, but worry remained in his face. Clara sat beside him. "You helped stop him." "I just yelled about a saddle." "You noticed something no one else did." The boy looked down, embarrassed and pleased at the same time. "Uncle Ben taught me tack," he said. "Said a man who doesn't check his cinch is either careless or dead soon." Caleb set plates on the table. "Your uncle was practical." "He was," Tommy said softly. For a moment, grief moved across the boy's face, quick and shy, like he was not sure he had permission to show it. Clara saw Caleb notice too. After breakfast, Tommy went out to help with the horses. He took his chores seriously, walking through snow with a proud stiffness that made him look smaller and older all at once. Clara stayed in the kitchen and gathered the letters into separate stacks. The evidence for Sheriff Maddox, the replies from women, Nathan's letters to her, the threatening notes. Caleb came in from the porch with a split log in each arm and stopped when he saw the last stack. Nathan's letters. The pale blue ribbon lay beside them. "You do not have to sort those today," he said. "I know." She touched the ribbon lightly. "For months, I thought these were the beginning of my life. Then I thought they were proof of my foolishness. Now I do not know what they are." Caleb set the wood beside the stove. "They are proof that you were offered a lie." She looked at him. "And that I believed it." "Yes," he said, "because it was written to be believed." That answer did not flatter her. It did not pity her. It simply made room for the truth without making the truth cruel. She picked up the first letter. I want to send copies to the sheriff. Then I want the originals back. Caleb nodded. All right. I have not decided what to do with them. You will. She looked at the knife mark on the table. Rose Harlan said a liar's shadow is not my home. She was right. And you said people who stay help heal. Caleb grew still. Clara looked up. I am trying to understand what staying means when I have only been here a short time. He did not move closer. I would never ask you to stay because leaving is hard. I know. Or because town will talk. I know that too. Or because I want you here. Her breath caught slightly. He looked down at the table, then back at her. That part is true, but it is not a fair reason unless you want it to. The quiet after that was gentle and frightening. Clara's fingers rested on Nathan's letters, but she was no longer looking at them. She was looking at Caleb, at the man who could say he wanted her without trying to use that wanting as a rope, at the man who gave her room to choose even when the choice might hurt him. Before she could answer, hoofbeats sounded outside. Caleb turned toward the window. Sheriff Maddox rode into the yard with Ruth Deacon beside him in a small wagon, wrapped in a dark coat and looking as if she had personally argued with the cold and won. Caleb opened the door before they reached the porch. Maddox came in first, removing his hat. Ruth followed with a leather satchel clutched in both hands. I have news, the sheriff said. Clara stood. Nathan. He is in the Cedar Ridge jail. He tried charm first, anger second, and silence third. None worked. Ruth placed the satchel on the table. And the wires? Clara asked. Maddox nodded. They came back faster than I expected. Abilene confirmed Martha Bell. The marshal there already had complaints from 2 creditors. Fort Collins confirmed Lydia Crane's statement. Topeka is sending a sworn letter from Mary Ellis. Lincoln may send Rose Harlan herself if weather allows. Clara pressed one hand to the back of a chair. Rose may come here. She wants to speak, Ruth said. Her words, not mine. Tommy had slipped in behind them and now stood near the door, listening. Maddox looked at the boy. And you, Tommy Reed, may be needed to give a statement. Tommy went pale. Clara moved toward him, only the truth. The boy swallowed. Will he be there? Not when you speak to me, Maddox said, and not without me standing between. Tommy looked at Caleb. Caleb nodded once. You can do it. The boy drew himself up a little. Yes, sir. Ruth opened the satchel and removed several envelopes. There is also one letter for you, Miss Whitmore, from Martha Bell. Clara's hand tightened around the chair. Caleb looked at her. You do not have to open it in front of us. But Clara was already reaching for it. The envelope was plain, the handwriting tired but careful. Clara opened it slowly, afraid of anger, afraid of blame, afraid of a woman's pain landing in her lap like another debt she could never repay. She read silently at first. Then halfway down the page, her face changed. What does she say? Caleb asked softly. Clara swallowed and began again, this time aloud. Miss Whitmore. Sheriff Maddox's wire reached Abilene yesterday. I will not pretend it did not shame me. It did, but not because of you. I have lived beside a man who made me doubt my own good sense for too many years. I knew he lied. I did not know how far the lies had traveled. You owe me nothing. I owe you thanks. If you had stayed silent, he would have come home with another story. And I might have believed part of it because believing is sometimes easier than breaking the whole house open. I have 3 children. I must think of them now. Not of his name, not of his pride, not of the neighbors. Please do not carry guilt that belongs to him. Clara stopped. The room was quiet. Even Ruth looked down for a moment. Clara read the final lines. her voice trembling but clear. "You went west to find a home. I hope you do. And if the man who stood beside you when truth came out is kind, do not let Nathan Bell's lies teach your heart to mistrust kindness. Men like Nathan destroy enough. Do not let him destroy that too. Martha Bell." Clara lowered the letter. No one spoke. The fire moved softly in the stove. Outside, a horse blew into the cold. Then Tommy whispered, "She sounds sad." "Yes," Clara said, "she does." "And strong," Ruth added. Clara folded the letter carefully and placed it beside Rose Harlan's. Sad and strong. That was how the women's voices were arriving now. Not broken, not foolish, not ruined. Sad and strong and finally heard. Sheriff Maddox took the evidence copies and promised to return the originals when the court no longer needed them. He said Nathan would be moved under guard once the marshal arrived. Ruth said she would keep the women's letters safe. Tommy gave his statement at the kitchen table, voice shaking at first, then growing steadier when Clara sat nearby and Caleb stood by the stove. By afternoon, the house had emptied again. Ruth and the sheriff were gone. Tommy was in the barn, pretending not to be proud of himself. Caleb was repairing the damaged latch on the kitchen door. Clara stood beside the table with Martha's letter in her hand. Caleb drove the last nail into the latch and tested it twice. "That should hold." "Caleb." He turned. Her voice made him still. "I need to go to Cedar Ridge tomorrow." He studied her. "For what?" "To see Nathan." His face hardened. "No." She lifted an eyebrow. He caught himself. "I mean, I do not think that is wise." "That is better." His mouth tightened. "Clara." "I do not want to speak with him alone. I do not want to argue. I do not want answers he will only twist, but I need to look at him once without fear." Caleb looked at the door latch, then at her. "Why?" "Because part of me still feels like the woman sitting on the trunk, waiting, wondering if he will finally explain why I was not worth meeting." She held Martha's letter tighter. "I want that part of me to know he has no answer worth hearing." Caleb's eyes softened with worry. "I will go with you." "I hoped you would." He nodded. Then she took a breath. "And after that, I need to decide something." He did not ask what. Maybe he already knew. The next morning, they rode to Cedar Ridge beneath a clear blue sky. Snow melted from roof edges. Smoke rose from chimneys. The town looked brighter than it had on the day Clara arrived, though nothing about the buildings had changed. People watched as she stepped down from Caleb's wagon. But this time, the watching was different. Mrs. Dempsey came out onto her porch and lifted a hand. Dottie waved openly from the cafe. The barber tipped his hat. Even men near the livery fell quiet, not with gossip this time, but respect. Clara walked beside Caleb to the jail. Sheriff Maddox met them at the door. "You sure?" "Yes." Inside, Nathan Bell sat behind iron bars, coat rumpled, charm worn thin. He looked up when Clara entered. For one heartbeat, surprise crossed his face. Then the old smile returned, weaker now but still trying to live. "Clara," he said, "I knew you would come." She stood a few feet from the bars. Caleb stayed behind her, close enough to help, far enough to let this be hers. Nathan's eyes flicked to him. Still hiding behind Rourke. Clara looked at Nathan with calm eyes. "No, I am standing in front of him." The smile faltered. "I can explain more if you give me time." "I did not come for an explanation." "Then why?" She drew in a slow breath. "To return something." From her coat pocket, she pulled the pale blue ribbon, not the letters, only the ribbon that had tied them. Her mother had given it to her when she left St. Louis, a small piece of home she had wrapped around Nathan's promises. She looked at it once, then placed it on the sheriff's desk beside the cell. Nathan frowned. What is that supposed to mean? It means you do not get to keep any part of the hope I brought with me. His face changed. For once, he had no ready answer. Clara turned toward the door. You will regret trusting Rourke, Nathan said suddenly. She stopped but did not turn back fully. No, she said, I regret trusting you. I am learning to trust myself. Then she walked out. Outside, sunlight struck the street so brightly she had to blink. Her chest felt tight but not heavy. The blue ribbon was gone. Nathan's voice was behind her. Caleb was beside her. She had thought she would feel sorrow. Instead, she felt space. They walked back to the wagon in silence. At the steps, Caleb stopped. Are you all right? Clara looked down Cedar Ridge's main street toward the station at the far end. The same platform, the same boards, the same place where she had sat with a trunk and a broken future. I want to go there, she said. Caleb followed her gaze. Then he offered his hand to help her into the wagon. They drove to the station without another word. Clara stood on the platform for a long time. No train waited. No crowd moved around her, just dust, melting snow, and pale winter sun. She walked to the exact place where her trunk had sat. Caleb remained a few steps behind. The wind touched her face. She closed her eyes and saw that first evening again. The empty platform, the letters in her lap, the shame closing around her like cold water. Then she opened her eyes and saw Caleb. He stood where he had stood before, hat in his hand, quiet and careful, as if the question he had asked that day still lived between them. Do you have somewhere to go tonight? Clara crossed the platform toward him. My answer has changed, she said. He looked at her, not understanding at first. To what? She took his hand. I do have somewhere to go. His fingers closed around her slowly. The train whistle sounded far off, lonely and clear, rolling across the winter plain. Caleb looked at her hand in his, then at her face. Hope had not erased the hurt. But it was speaking now. And Clara finally felt ready to listen. The whistle faded across Cedar Ridge, leaving Clara and Caleb standing on the platform where everything had begun. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The station boards were dry now, with small patches of melting snow gathered near the edges. A porter carried a crate past the freight door. Somewhere down the street, a wagon bell jingled softly. Life moved around them as if this place had not once held the worst hour of Clara's life. But Clara felt the difference. The first time she had stood here, she had been waiting for a man who had already left her behind. Now she stood beside a man who had waited for her to choose. Caleb's hand remained around hers, warm and careful. He did not hold too tightly. That was what made her hold on. You said your answer changed, he said at last. Clara looked down at their joined hands. Yes. To the question I asked at the station. She smiled faintly. You asked if I had somewhere to go. I did. I did not then. And now. She looked toward the road that led east out of town, toward Willow Creek Ranch beyond the hills, toward the plain house with the scarred kitchen table, the barn room, Tommy's crooked grin, the honest work waiting under the winter sky. Now I do, she said, but I do not only mean the ranch. Caleb grew very still. Clara turned fully toward him. I mean a life where I am not someone's last choice, not a foolish woman hidden under another man's shame, not a guest waiting to be told when to leave. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. I mean a place where truth is plain, work matters, and kindness is not used as a trap. Caleb's eyes held hers. And you think Willow Creek can be that? I think it already started becoming that when you carried my trunk." A soft wind moved across the platform. Caleb looked away for a moment, as if the words had gone somewhere too deep for him to answer quickly. When he looked back, his face carried the same fear and hope she had seen at the kitchen table. "I need to say this right," he said. "You do not have to make it fancy. I couldn't if I tried." That made her laugh softly. The sound loosened something in him. He took off his hat and held it in one hand, the way he had on the day they met. But this time, he was not speaking to a stranded woman. He was speaking to the woman who had seen his quiet rooms, his old wounds, his plain heart, and had stayed long enough to understand them. "Clara," he said, "I have lived alone so long that I made a habit of calling it peace. It was not peace. It was just a house where no one expected anything from me because no one was there." She listened without moving. "When I found you sitting here, I thought I was doing one decent thing before riding home. Then one decent thing became another, the boarding house, the ranch, the sheriff, the letters." He swallowed. "Somewhere in all that, I started looking for your cup on the table before I poured coffee. I started listening for your step in the hall. I started caring what you thought of the fence line, the accounts, the weather, even that old horse who now believes he is worth more than the barn." "Gerald is worth more than the barn," Clara said. Caleb's mouth curved. "I know better than to argue." Then the smile faded into something more serious. "I am not Nathan Bell. I will not promise you a perfect home or easy days. I have a hard ranch, a stubborn horse, and a kitchen table with a knife scar in it. I am slow with words. I will likely disappoint you in small ways without meaning to, but I will not lie to you. I will not leave you waiting, and I will not make your hope feel foolish." Clara's eyes filled then. Not from pain. From the strange, gentle shock of hearing someone speak to the exact wound without pressing on it. Caleb reached into his coat pocket. Her breath caught. He pulled out a simple silver ring. It was not new. It had a soft shine worn into it by years of being kept carefully. A small scratch crossed one side. "It was my mother's," he said. "I did not know if I would ever use it. For a while I thought it was kinder to let it stay in the drawer." He looked at the ring, then at her. "But I would like to ask now if hope is ready enough to answer." Clara looked at the ring, then at Caleb. Around them, Cedar Ridge continued as usual. A horse snorted. The station master shut a window. A child laughed near the road. Nothing stopped to witness the moment, and somehow that made it more true. Caleb's voice lowered. "Will you marry me, Clara Whitmore? Not because you need saving, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you choose me and I choose you back." Clara's tears slipped free, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. Caleb blinked once, as if the word had struck him harder than he expected. "Yes. Yes, Caleb, I choose you." He let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for years. He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that were steady until the very last moment. When the ring settled in place, Clara closed her hand around his. There were no cheers, no fiddle, no church bells. Only winter sun, old station boards, and two people standing where loneliness had once sat between them. That was enough. When they returned to town, Ruth Deacon saw the ring first. Of course she did. She was standing outside the post office with a bundle of mail and the sharp-eyed calm of a woman who missed nothing. Her gaze dropped to Clara's hand, then lifted to Caleb's face. "Well," Ruth said, "it appears the mail was not the only thing delivered today." Clara laughed. Caleb looked embarrassed enough to satisfy half the town. By sunset, Mrs. Dempsey knew. Dottie knew. Sheriff Maddox knew. The barber knew before anyone told him, which he claimed was because Caleb looked like a man who had walked into the sun and forgotten his hat. Tommy found out in the barn. He was brushing Gerald with great seriousness when Clara and Caleb came in. The old horse turned his head as if he had been waiting for the news first. Tommy saw the ring and froze. "You're marrying him?" he asked Clara. "I am." Tommy looked at Caleb. "Does that mean she stays?" Caleb's face softened. "If she wants to." Clara stepped closer and placed one hand on Gerald's neck. "I want to." Tommy looked down at the brush in his hand. His voice came out smaller than he meant it to. "And me?" The question broke Clara's heart in a quiet place. Caleb looked at the boy for a long moment. "You have work here if you want it," Caleb said. "A bed too. School in town once roads clear. We'll figure the rest as we go." Tommy swallowed hard. "That sounds like staying." "It can be," Clara said gently. The boy nodded, too proud to cry, too young to hide how much he wanted to. Gerald nudged his shoulder, nearly knocking him sideways. Tommy wiped his sleeve across his nose and muttered, "He knows." "He knows everything," Clara said. Caleb sighed. "Please do not encourage the horse." Spring came slowly to Willow Creek Ranch. Nathan Bell was taken east under guard before the thaw. The charges were not as simple as Clara wished, but they were real. Fraud, threats, false identities, debts tied to names he thought he had buried. More letters came from more women, each one adding weight to the truth. Martha Bell left Abilene with her children and went to live with her brother in Kansas, where, according to Ruth's later letter, she had begun keeping books for a grain office and was said to be better at it than the owner. That news pleased Clara more than she could explain. Rose Harlan wrote again too. Her letter was short. "Miss Whitmore, I heard he was taken. I slept well for the first time in years. May you do the same." Clara kept that letter in the kitchen drawer, not with pain but with respect. Her own letters from Nathan were copied for the law, then returned. For 3 days they sat on the table, tied with no ribbon now. Caleb never asked what she meant to do with them. On the 4th evening, Clara carried them outside. The sky was pink over the western hills. Snow had melted into dark mud near the fence posts, and thin green shoots were beginning to show near the creek. Caleb was repairing a gate with Tommy, both of them pretending not to watch her. Clara walked to the creek bank. The water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. She knelt and placed the letters inside an old tin box, not burned, not torn, not thrown like something shameful, just closed away. Then she buried the box beneath the cottonwood tree near the bend in the creek. Caleb came to stand behind her after a while. "Finished?" he asked. Clara brushed dirt from her gloves. "Yes." He looked at the ground, then at her. "You sure you don't want to keep them?" "I am keeping what they taught me," she said. "I do not need to carry the paper." He nodded, understanding. A month later, they married in the small Cedar Ridge church. Clara wore a soft blue dress Ruth, and Mrs. Dempsey helped alter from fabric bought at the mercantile. Caleb wore his best dark coat and looked as if facing a minister required more courage than facing Nathan Bell at the door. Tommy stood near the front, cleaned and combed within an inch of his patience. Gerald, much to Caleb's horror, was tied outside the church with a blue ribbon on his bridle, because Clara insisted he had earned witness status. The whole town came. Not because Cedar Ridge had forgotten its gossip, but because truth had changed the shape of the story. They no longer saw the abandoned woman from the station. They saw the woman who had stood before a liar and taken her name back. When Reverend Hollies asked if Caleb took Clara as his wife, Caleb answered, "I do," so clearly that Dottie cried. When he asked Clara, she looked at Caleb and thought of the station, the snow, the letters, the scarred table, the quiet hand reaching across fear. "I do," she said. And she meant not only marriage. She meant Wyoming. She meant Willow Creek. She meant choosing a life that had not begun the way she planned, but had become truer than anything she had imagined. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch. Mrs. Dempsey brought pies. Ruth brought coffee strong enough to settle legal disputes. Sheriff Maddox brought a smile no one expected and a new latch for the kitchen door as a wedding gift. Tommy gave them a small wooden sign he had carved himself. Willow Creek Home. The letters were uneven, and the H leaned slightly to the left, but Clara held it like it was made of silver. That evening, after the guests left and the lamps were lit, Caleb hung the sign above the kitchen door. Clara stood beside the table and touched the knife scar with 2 fingers. It was still there. It would always be there. Not as a wound now. As proof. Proof that lies had entered this house and failed to own it. Proof that fear had knocked and truth had answered. Proof that love did not always arrive with perfect timing or beautiful promises. Sometimes it came as a quiet man on a station platform asking one simple question. Sometimes it carried your trunk when your pride was too tired to carry anything else. Sometimes it waited until your heart could answer from hope instead of hurt. Caleb came to stand beside her. "You all right?" he asked. Clara looked around the kitchen. Tommy asleep by the stove after too much pie. Gerald visible through the window, somehow standing as if he expected credit for the wedding. The fire warm, the table scarred, the house alive. Then she looked at her husband. "Yes," she said, "I am home." Caleb took her hand, and outside, beyond the dark window, the Wyoming stars came out one by one over Willow Creek Ranch. The woman who had once waited alone on a trunk no longer waited for someone else's promise. She had chosen her own place. And this time, the man beside her stayed.